Eleanor Shaw stood beside a broken wagon under the brutal Montana sun, clutching a letter from a man who'd promised her a future, then vanished before she arrived. No husband, no home, no explanation. Just abandonment on the frontier where a woman alone had two choices: submit to whatever man would have her or starve. She'd traveled 2,000 miles for belonging. What she found instead was a locked gate, an empty house, and a rancher named Caleb Monroe watching from across the fence line. A stranger who would either save her or become one more man who saw her as something to use and discard. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Eleanor's journey reaches across the world. The heat came first. It pressed down on Eleanor Shaw's shoulders like hands trying to force her into the dust, relentless and indifferent. The Montana sun had no mercy for women in traveling clothes, no sympathy for the sweat gathering beneath her collar or the way her corset stays dug into ribs that hadn't had a full breath since dawn. She stood beside the wagon. Her wagon now, she supposed, since the driver had left it here and taken his payment and his horse and disappeared back toward the railroad depot without looking back. The gate before her was locked. Beyond it, a small house sat dark and shuttered, its windows reflecting nothing but sky. No smoke from the chimney, no movement in the yard. No man named William Dockery waiting to greet the bride he'd sent for 6 months ago with letters full of promises about partnership and respectability and a life built together on good Montana land. Eleanor had read those letters so many times the paper had gone soft at the creases. She'd believed every word. "Ma'am?" The voice came from her left, rough-edged and careful. Eleanor turned, one hand rising instinctively to shade her eyes, and found a man sitting astride a dark bay horse on the other side of the fence line. He was tall in the saddle, broad through the shoulders, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of river stones, gray-green and unreadable. His hat brim cast his face in shadow, but she could see the concern there, measured and quiet. "You've been standing there near an hour," he said. His voice carried the particular restraint of a man who'd learned not to waste words. "Gate's locked. House has been empty 3 weeks now." Eleanor's throat closed. 3 weeks. She'd been traveling for 5. "I'm looking for William Dockery," she managed, though her voice came out thinner than she'd intended. He sent for me. I'm his intended bride." Something shifted in the man's expression. Not surprise exactly, but a kind of grim recognition. He dismounted in one smooth motion, boots hitting earth with a soft thud, and walked to the fence line. Up close, Eleanor could see he was younger than his bearing suggested, maybe 30, maybe less, with the kind of face that had forgotten how to show easy emotion. There were scars there, faint white lines near his left eye, and his hands on the fence rail were work-hardened and scarred across the knuckles. "Name's Caleb Monroe," he said quietly. "I own the land west of here, and I'm sorry to tell you this, ma'am, but Dockery pulled out 2, maybe 3 weeks back, sold what stock he had, settled his debts at the mercantile, and took the stage east. Didn't leave word where he was going or when he'd be back." The world tilted. Eleanor felt it physically, the way the horizon seemed to slide sideways, the way her knees wanted to unlock and drop her into the dirt. She locked them, forced them straight, because she'd learned young that the moment you fell, people stopped seeing you as a woman and started seeing you as a problem to be managed. "That's not possible," she heard herself say. The words sounded distant, like someone else was speaking. "He wrote to me. We had an arrangement, a contract." She fumbled in her bag, a worn carpet bag that held everything she owned in the world, and pulled out the most recent letter. Her hands shook as she unfolded it. The paper felt fragile between her fingers, delicate as hope. Caleb took the letter when she held it out, his movements gentle, and read it in silence. His jaw tightened as his eyes moved across the lines. When he looked up, there was anger there, not at her, but simmering beneath his careful restraint like coals waiting for air. "When'd you receive this?" "April," Eleanor whispered. He said the cabin was ready, that he'd meet me at the depot, that we'd—" Her voice cracked. She clamped her mouth shut, pressed her lips together until they hurt. "No crying, not here, not in front of a stranger." "You came in on this morning's train?" She nodded. And he wasn't there. The station master said no one had left word, no messages, nothing. The admission tasted like ash. I hired a wagon to bring me here. The driver charged me $8 and left me at the gate. Caleb's expression went dark. $8 to drive 5 miles? He said it was frontier rates. Eleanor felt heat climb her neck that had nothing to do with the sun. I didn't know any better. For a long moment, Caleb said nothing. He looked at the locked gate, at the empty house beyond, then back at Eleanor with something that might have been respect. You traveled alone? From Philadelphia. Family there? No. The word came out flat, final, because there was no point in elaborating, no purpose in explaining that her family had been a succession of people who'd made it clear she was a burden they tolerated until they didn't have to anymore. An orphan passed between relatives like an unwanted heirloom, kept out of duty, and discarded the moment propriety allowed. Caleb studied her for another breath, then seemed to come to some internal decision. He turned and whistled sharp and low. The bay horse trotted over, ground-trained and patient, and Caleb pulled a canteen from his saddle. "Drink," he said, holding it out. Eleanor hesitated. "It's just water, ma'am. Your son's sick. Drink." She took the canteen. The water was warm and tasted of leather and metal, but it was wet and clean, and she drank 3 long swallows before she could stop herself. When she lowered the canteen, Caleb was watching her with the same careful assessment she'd seen on farmers evaluating livestock. Not cruel, just measuring. "You got money left?" The question was so blunt it took her a moment to process. Eleanor flushed again, but she forced herself to answer honestly. $11 and some change. Family you can wire? No. Friends? No. Caleb nodded slowly, as if she'd just confirmed something he'd already guessed. He glanced at the sun, now slanting toward late afternoon, then back at Eleanor. His jaw worked like he was chewing over words before speaking them. "I got a ranch about a mile west of here," he said finally. "It's not much. Small cabin, barn, some grazing land. I run cattle, keep a garden, mind my own business." He paused, and when he continued, his voice carried the weight of a man making a promise he knew he'd keep. "You can stay there. Tonight, at least. Give you time to figure out what comes next." Eleanor stared at him. Every lesson she'd ever learned about men and their offers came rushing back. The way kindness always came with a price. The way shelter meant obligation. The way a woman alone was seen as available, as something to be claimed. "I can't pay you," she said carefully. "Didn't ask you to." I don't know you." "No, ma'am, you don't." Caleb's expression didn't change. "But I know what happens to women alone on the frontier when the sun goes down, and I'm not inclined to let that happen when I can prevent it." He gestured toward the wagon. "You got belongings in there?" "A trunk, some bags." "We'll load it. My place has a front room with a door that locks from the inside. You can take that. I'll sleep in the barn." He said it matter-of-factly, the way another man might discuss the weather. "No expectations, no obligations, just a roof and a bed until you figure out your next step." Eleanor looked at him, really looked. She saw the scars on his hands, the weathering on his face, the quiet way he held himself like a man who'd learned to take up only the space he needed and no more. She saw the careful distance he maintained, the way he didn't step closer or crowd her, the way his offer had come with boundaries already built in. She thought about the empty house behind the locked gate, about the man who'd made promises and broken them without a word, about the $11 in her bag and the 1,000 miles of nothing between here and anywhere else she might go. And she thought about the alternative, walking back to town alone, trying to find work or shelter or anything at all in a place where she knew no one and no one knew her. "Why?" she asked quietly. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" Caleb looked away, out toward the horizon where the land rolled endlessly toward mountains she could barely see through the heat shimmer. When he spoke again, his voice had gone rough. "My wife died 3 years ago," he said. "Fever took her in winter. Wasn't anything I could do except watch." He turned back to Eleanor, and there was old grief in his eyes, worn smooth by time but never fully healed. "I know what it's like to be alone out here. I know what it costs, and I'm not going to leave you standing in the sun when I got the means to help." The simple honesty of it cut through every defense Eleanor had built. She nodded once. Just once. All right. Caleb worked with an economy of movement that spoke of years doing hard labor alone. He unhitched the wagon mule, an older animal with patient eyes, and tied it to his saddle. Then he lifted Eleanor's trunk like it weighed nothing and secured it behind the saddle with rope that appeared from somewhere in his gear. Her 2 bags followed, balanced carefully. "You ride?" he asked. "Not well." "Can you sit a horse if it's walking?" "I think so." He brought the bay over and held the stirrup. "Step up. I'll lead him. He's steady." Eleanor gathered her skirts, dusty now and sweat-stained, and managed to get her foot in the stirrup. Caleb's hand on her elbow was brief and impersonal, just enough support to help her swing up. The horse shifted beneath her but didn't startle. She found the reins, gripped them too tight, and tried not to think about how high off the ground she was. "Relax," Caleb said quietly. He was already walking, leading the horse by the bridle with the mule trailing behind. "He can feel your nerves. Just breathe and move with him." They walked in silence. The land around them was bigger than anything Eleanor had imagined during the long train ride west. Philadelphia had been buildings and cobblestones and narrow streets where the sky was a stripe of blue between roof lines. Here, the sky was everything, vast and pale and empty except for the sun burning its way toward evening. The grass stretched in all directions, golden brown and studded with sage, and the wind moved through it in waves that reminded Eleanor of water. It was beautiful. It was also terrifying in its emptiness. "How long have you been out here?" she asked, more to break the silence than because she expected conversation. 6 years, came out after the war, filed a homestead claim, built the cabin, brought Sarah out when we married. Caleb's voice was even, factual. "She lasted 2 years. Liked it here, though. Said she could breathe. I'm sorry for your loss. Appreciate that." They walked another quarter-mile before Eleanor worked up the courage to ask the question pressing against her ribs. "What happens if I can't? If there's nowhere else for me to go?" Caleb glanced back at her, his expression unreadable beneath his hat brim. "Then we'll figure something out, one step at a time." It wasn't a promise, it wasn't a solution, but it was something other than abandonment, and right now, that was enough. Teet. The ranch appeared gradually, first a dark line against the horizon, then the shape of buildings resolving as they got closer. The cabin was small, built from rough-cut logs chinked with mud and straw, with a pitched roof and a stone chimney. Beside it stood a barn, weathered gray, and beyond that a corral with 3 horses watching their approach with mild interest. A creek ran somewhere nearby. Eleanor could hear water moving over stones. It was modest. It was also clearly cared for. The fence lines were straight. The garden plot beside the cabin showed rows of green growth, vegetables maybe, and what might have been herbs. Someone had built a bench near the front door, positioned to catch the evening shade. Caleb led them into the yard and helped Eleanor down. Her legs shook when her feet hit the ground, hours of traveling catching up all at once, but she locked her knees and stayed upright. "Give me a minute to get your trunk inside," Caleb said. He was already moving, lifting the trunk again, carrying it toward the cabin door. He kicked it open, it wasn't locked, and disappeared inside. Eleanor heard the sound of something heavy being set down. Then Caleb reappeared and gestured her forward. "Come on, I'll show you." The cabin's interior was dim after the bright sunlight, and it took Eleanor's eyes a moment to adjust. When they did, she found herself standing in a single main room that served as kitchen, dining area, and living space all at once. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a cooking area built into it. A rough-hewn table sat near the center with 2 chairs. Shelves lined another wall, holding dishes, supplies, a few books. Everything was clean. Sparse, but clean. "That door there leads to the front room," Caleb said, pointing. "It's got a bed, a washstand, and a trunk for storage. Door's got a bolt on the inside." He paused, then added quietly, "I want you to use it, every night. I don't care if you think you can trust me or not. You lock that door." Eleanor looked at him. "Where will you sleep?" "Barn's comfortable enough. I've slept there before." He moved past her to the shelves and pulled down a tin.
There's coffee here, some dried meat, beans, flour. Help yourself to whatever you need. I'll bring in water from the creek before I settle the animals. I can help. No. The word was gentle, but absolute. You've been traveling for weeks. You're exhausted. Rest. He set the tin on the table and headed for the door, then paused with his hand on the frame. Eleanor. It was the first time he'd used her name. She looked up. You're safe here, Caleb said quietly. I give you my word on that. Whatever else happens, whatever you decide to do next, while you're under my roof, you're safe. Understood? Eleanor's throat tightened. She managed a nod. Caleb nodded back and left. Eleanor stood in the silence for a long moment, listening to the sound of Caleb moving outside. Hoofbeats, the creak of the barn door, low words to the animals. Then she turned slowly, taking in the space that was, for tonight at least, shelter. The front room was exactly as Caleb had described, small, simple. The bed was a wooden frame with a rope lattice and a thin mattress, covered with quilts that looked handmade. The washstand held a ceramic basin and pitcher. A single window looked out toward the creek, and the light coming through it was starting to soften toward evening gold. Eleanor sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress gave slightly under her weight. The quilt smelled like cedar and sage. Outside, she could hear birds starting their evening songs, and the wind moving through grass and the distant sound of water. She thought about William Dockery, the man she'd traveled 2,000 miles to marry, the man who'd written letters about partnership and building something together, the man who'd looked at her arrival date and decided to leave before she got here rather than face her. She thought about the locked gate and the empty house and the wagon driver who'd charged her $8 because he knew she had no choice but to pay. She thought about Philadelphia, about the cousin who'd made it clear Eleanor's presence was tolerated only until she could be married off, about the endless years of being unwanted, unvalued, unseen except as a burden or an obligation. And she thought about Caleb Monroe, a stranger who'd looked at her standing alone in the sun and made a choice to help without asking for anything in return. Eleanor pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapped her arms around them, and finally, let herself cry. She cried quietly, the way she'd learned to cry as a child when tears were considered manipulation and punished accordingly. She cried into her skirts, muffling the sound, until her ribs ached and her throat was raw and her eyes burned. When she was done, she wiped her face with shaking hands, stood up, and went to the washstand. The pitcher was full of clean water. She poured some into the basin, splashed her face, and looked at her reflection in the small mirror hung above the stand. Her face was blotchy and swollen. Her hair had come half loose from its pins. Her traveling dress was dusty and wrinkled beyond repair. She looked like exactly what she was, a woman who'd gambled everything on a promise and lost. But she was still standing. Eleanor straightened her spine, lifted her chin, and began unpinning her hair. Caleb didn't come back to the cabin that night. Eleanor heard him moving in the barn, the sound of animals being fed, of gear being stored, of someone settling in for the night. She made herself eat a little of the dried meat and some bread she found wrapped in cloth, though her stomach was still knotted tight. Then she washed as best she could with the basin water changed into her nightgown, and crawled into the bed. She lay there in the growing darkness, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the Montana frontier. Wind, water, the call of some night bird she didn't recognize, the creak of the cabin settling, and silence. Not the silence of absence or neglect, but the silence of solitude, the kind that came when there was finally enough space to breathe. Eleanor pulled the quilts up to her chin and closed her eyes. Sleep didn't come easily. Her mind kept circling back to the same questions. What now? Where do I go? What am I going to do? But underneath those questions was something else, something quieter. The memory of Caleb's voice saying, "You're safe here. I give you my word on that. It shouldn't have mattered." She didn't know him, didn't know if his word meant anything or if this was just another kind of trap. Prettier than most, but a trap nonetheless. And yet something about the way he looked at her, like she was a person, not a problem. Like her presence mattered, even if it complicated his life. Like he saw her standing there alone and couldn't walk away. That mattered.
Eleanor pulled the quilts tighter and let her eyes drift closed. Tomorrow, she'd start figuring out what came next. Tonight, she'd rest. She woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee. For a confused moment, Eleanor didn't know where she was. The bed was unfamiliar, the sounds were wrong. Then memory rushed back. William, the empty house, Caleb, the cabin. She sat up quickly, heart hammering, and looked around the small room. Her trunk was exactly where Caleb had left it. The door was still bolted from the inside. Everything was as it had been. The smell of coffee was stronger now, and she could hear movement in the main room, quiet, careful movement, like someone trying not to wake her. Eleanor climbed out of bed, finger-combed her hair into something resembling order, and pulled on her day dress. It was wrinkled, but it would have to do. She unbolted the door and stepped into the main room. Caleb stood at the fireplace, pouring coffee into 2 tin cups. He'd changed clothes, or maybe these were just cleaner versions of the same thing, and his hair was damp like he'd washed at the creek. When he heard her, he glanced over his shoulder. "Morning," he said quietly. "Hope I didn't wake you." "No, I just—" Eleanor gestured vaguely. "What time is it?" "Little past 7. Sun's been up about 2 hours." He held out one of the cups. "Coffee?" She crossed the room and took it. The cup was warm against her palms, and the coffee was strong and bitter and exactly what she needed. "Thank you." Caleb nodded and moved to the table, where he'd set out bread, butter, and what looked like preserves in a small jar. "Not much for breakfast. I usually just have coffee and get to work, but you should eat something." Eleanor sat. The chair was solid beneath her, and the table was scarred from years of use, but clean. She spread butter on a piece of bread and forced herself to take a bite. It was good, simple, but good. They ate in silence for a while. Caleb seemed comfortable with it, but Eleanor felt the weight of unasked questions pressing down. Finally, she set down her bread. "I need to ask you something," she said. Caleb looked up. "What happens now?" He took a slow drink of coffee, considering. "That depends on what you want to happen." "I don't know." The admission felt like failure. "I came here to marry William Dockery. That's not happening. I can't go back to Philadelphia. I have $11 and no skills that anyone needs, so I don't know what I want because I don't know what's possible." Caleb set his cup down carefully. "You can stay here as long as you need to. I meant that." "Why?" The question burst out before she could stop it. "You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. Why would you do this?" For a long moment, Caleb said nothing. He stared down at his coffee like it might hold answers, and Eleanor almost apologized, almost took the question back. Then he spoke. 3 years ago, Sarah got sick. Started with a cough. Turned into fever. By the time I got her to a doctor in town, there was nothing to be done. His voice was flat, carefully controlled. She died in a room above the Mercantile because the hotel wouldn't take us. Said they didn't want fever spreading. The doctor's wife sat with her because the doctor was too busy, and I stood outside in the hall and listened to her die alone because they wouldn't let me in. Eleanor's breath caught. "I know what it's like to need help and have doors close," Caleb continued. "I know what it feels like to be alone when the world's got no use for you. And I swore when Sarah died that if I ever had the chance to help someone who needed it, I would. No questions, no conditions." He looked up and his eyes were steady. "You needed help. I had the means to give it. That's all there is to it." The simple truth of it sat between them like something tangible. Eleanor's hands trembled around her coffee cup. "I don't know how to repay this. Don't want repayment. Want you to figure out your next step without being desperate or scared or forced into something you don't want." "What if my next step takes weeks? Months?" "Then it takes what it takes." Caleb pushed back from the table and stood. "I've got work to do. Fences need checking, cattle need moving. You're welcome to come with me if you want to see the land, or you can stay here and rest. Your choice." He was halfway to the door when Eleanor spoke. "Caleb?" He turned. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for seeing me, for helping, for treating me like I matter." Something shifted in Caleb's expression, a softening, brief and quickly controlled. He nodded once. "You do matter," he said. "Don't forget that." Then he was gone, And Eleanor was alone with her coffee and the morning light and the strange, fragile feeling that maybe, just maybe, the world wasn't done with her yet. Eleanor spent the morning exploring. She moved carefully, aware that this was Caleb's space and she was a guest, an unwanted intrusion, no matter how kind he'd been. But he'd said she could stay, and she needed to understand where she was. The cabin was simple but well built. The main room had everything necessary for survival: the fireplace for cooking and heat, shelves stocked with basic supplies, a table and chairs that were worn but solid. Sarah's presence was still here in small ways: a set of blue patterned dishes, a rag rug beside the bed, wildflowers dried and hung from the rafters. The front room where Eleanor had slept was sparse but clean. Her trunk fit easily against one wall, and the window let in good light. It was more space than she'd had in Philadelphia, where she'd shared a cramped attic room with her cousin's children. Outside, the ranch spread in simple efficiency. The barn was larger than the cabin, built to house animals and gear through Montana winters. The corral held 3 horses: Caleb's bay and 2 others, one a sturdy pinto and the other a gray mare with a gentle eye. Beyond the immediate yard, the land rolled away in all directions, broken only by the creek line marked with cottonwoods and the distant suggestion of mountains. Eleanor walked down to the creek and stood watching water move over smooth stones. It was clear and cold when she knelt to cup some in her hands, tasting of minerals and snowmelt from somewhere far away. Birds moved in the trees, magpies, she thought, based on their harsh calls, and the wind carried the smell of sage and sun-warmed earth. She'd never been anywhere this big, this open. It should have felt lonely. Instead, it felt like possibility. Eleanor returned to the cabin and found the garden. It was clear someone had been tending it, though not recently. Weeds were starting to encroach, and some of the plants looked stressed from the heat. She studied the rows for a moment, identifying what she could: beans, squash, something that might be carrots, herbs she didn't recognize. Without thinking too hard about it, Eleanor knelt in the dirt and started pulling weeds. Her dress would be ruined, her hands would blister. She didn't care. The work was simple, physical, and blessedly free of thought. She lost herself in it. Caleb returned near noon, leading his horse and looking sun-worn and dusty. He stopped when he saw Eleanor in the garden, her skirts tucked up and her hands buried in earth, and something crossed his face too quick to read. "Didn't expect you to work," he said. Eleanor sat back on her heels, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of one hand. "I needed something to do. I hope that's all right." "More than all right." Caleb dismounted and walked over, studying the cleared rows with what might have been approval. "Haven't had time to keep up with it. Been focused on the cattle." "I don't know much about gardening," Eleanor admitted, "but I can pull weeds and water. If you'll show me what needs doing, I can help." Caleb crouched beside her, examining a bean plant with gentle fingers. "These need staking, and the squash would do better with more water. There's a bucket by the well." He glanced at her. "You sure you want to do this? It's hot work." "I'm sure." Eleanor met his gaze directly. "I need to be useful. I need to have something that's mine, even if it's just a garden." Understanding flickered in Caleb's eyes. He nodded slowly. "All right then. Let me show you what's what." They worked together through the afternoon heat, Caleb explaining which plants were which, Eleanor listening and learning and gradually building a picture of what this garden could be with proper care. He was patient, never condescending, treating her questions as worth answering. When the sun started slanting toward evening, Caleb stood and stretched, joints popping. "That's enough for today. You'll be sore tomorrow if you keep going." Eleanor stood too, feeling muscles protest that she'd forgotten existed. Her hands were dirt-stained and her dress was beyond saving, but something in her chest felt looser than it had since the train had pulled into the depot. "Thank you," she said, "for teaching me. You're a quick learner." Caleb's tone was matter-of-fact. "Garden will be the better for it." They walked back to the cabin together. Caleb hauled water from the well while Eleanor tried to make herself presentable, scrubbing dirt from her hands at the washstand. When she emerged, Caleb had started a fire in the fireplace and was pulling supplies from the shelves. "Can you cook?" he asked. "Some, but basic things." "Good. Because I'm terrible at it. There might have been the ghost of a smile at the corner of his mouth. Sarah used to say I could burn water. Eleanor found herself almost smiling back. I'll do my best not to. They made dinner together, beans and salt pork and cornbread cooked in the fireplace. It was simple food, frontier food, but it was hot and filling, and they'd made it together. They ate at the table while the light outside shifted from gold to purple, not talking much, just existing in the same space. When the dishes were washed and put away, Caleb pulled on his coat. I'll be in the barn if you need anything, he said. Same as last night. Eleanor nodded. Then, on impulse, she said, Caleb, would you teach me to ride? Properly, I mean? He paused, considering. You planning to go somewhere? No, I don't like feeling helpless. And out here, not being able to ride means being trapped. True enough, Caleb adjusted his hat. We'll start tomorrow. Early, before it gets too hot. Thank you. He nodded and left. Eleanor stood in the cabin doorway and watched him cross the yard to the barn, a tall figure moving easily through the gathering dark. Then she closed the door, bolted the lock on her bedroom door, and lay down in the bed that was slowly starting to feel familiar. Outside, the frontier night settled in with all its vast emptiness and strange sounds. Inside, Eleanor Shaw closed her eyes and slept without crying. It felt like progress. The days that followed established a rhythm Eleanor hadn't expected to find. She woke before dawn to the sound of Caleb moving in the yard, his boots crunching gravel as he fed the horses. By the time she'd dressed and come outside, he'd have the mare saddled and waiting. The gray one he called Stella, chosen for her patient temperament and steady gait. Those early morning lessons were quiet affairs, just Caleb's low voice explaining how to sit, how to hold the reins, how to move with the animal instead of against it. Don't grip so tight, he'd say, his hand briefly covering hers to show the right amount of pressure. She can feel your fear. Breathe through it. Eleanor learned. Slowly at first, her body stiff with anxiety every time Stella moved faster than a walk. But Caleb never pushed, never mocked her hesitation. He just kept showing her, kept talking her through it, until one morning she realized she was cantering across the meadow with the wind in her face and no fear at all, just exhilaration. When she pulled Stella to a halt near where Caleb sat watching on his bay, he nodded once. You're a natural, he said. The praise was small, simple. It shouldn't have mattered. It mattered terribly. After the riding lessons came breakfast, whatever Eleanor could manage from the supplies on hand. She was learning to cook over the fireplace, learning which cuts of meat needed slow heat and which could handle the direct flame, learning how to make bread that didn't come out heavy as stones. Caleb ate whatever she made without complaint, even the failures, and on the rare occasions when something came out well, he'd look up from his plate with genuine appreciation. This is good, he'd say, just that. But Eleanor learned to read the sincerity in his voice. Then they'd work, sometimes together, sometimes separately. Caleb had cattle to tend, fences to repair, 100 tasks that came with running a ranch alone. Eleanor claimed the garden as her territory and threw herself into bringing it back to life. She staked the beans, rigged a watering system using buckets and rope, pulled weeds until her back screamed. The work was hard enough to exhaust her body and simple enough to quiet her mind. In the evenings, after the heat had broken and the land had started to breathe again, they'd sit on the bench outside the cabin. Sometimes Caleb would read aloud from one of the books on his shelf, poetry mostly, or passages from newspapers weeks old. His reading voice was different from his speaking voice, more careful, like he was handling something fragile. Sometimes they'd just sit in silence and watch the sun paint the sky impossible colors. Eleanor had never known silence could be comfortable. She learned it was. 3 weeks passed this way, then 4. The garden flourished under Eleanor's care, producing beans and squash and carrots that she harvested with pride. Her hands developed calluses. Her skin darkened from the sun despite her bonnet. Her body grew stronger from the constant physical work. She stopped looking east toward town, toward escape routes. She started looking around at the land itself, at the way the light changed throughout the day, at the patterns the wind made in the grass, at the hawks circling high overhead. She learned the names of things from Caleb. That plant was sage. That bird was a meadowlark. Those mountains in the distance were the crazies. "Why are they called that?" she asked one evening. Caleb shrugged. "Story goes, a woman went mad up there in the early days, wandered into the mountains in winter and never came back. People say you can still hear her calling sometimes when the wind's right." Eleanor shivered. "Do you believe that?" "I believe the frontier makes people see what they need to see." Caleb's voice was quiet. "Loneliness does things to your mind, makes you hear things, see things. It's why having someone to talk to matters." He didn't look at her when he said it, but Eleanor felt the weight of the words anyway. "Is that why you let me stay?" she asked. "Because you were lonely?" "No." Caleb turned then, his gray-green eyes serious. "I let you stay because it was the right thing to do, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't appreciate the company." Something warm unfurled in Eleanor's chest. She looked away, focusing on the sunset, and let the feeling settle. That night, for the first time since arriving, she left her bedroom door unbolted. Nothing happened. Caleb stayed in the barn, as he always did. But the choice itself felt significant, a small declaration of trust. The next morning, Eleanor found a bundle of fabric on the kitchen table with a note in Caleb's rough handwriting. "Thought you could use this. See." She unfolded the fabric and found 2 work dresses in sturdy cotton, clearly made for frontier life, along with a pair of women's boots only slightly worn. They were Sarah's things. Had to be. Eleanor's throat tightened as she held the dresses against herself. They'd need taking in. Sarah had been taller, broader through the shoulders, but they were good quality, practical. When Caleb came in from feeding the horses, Eleanor was still holding the dresses. "I can't take these," she said quietly. "Why not?" "They were your wife's." "They were. And now they're yours." Caleb poured himself coffee, his back to her. "Sarah would have wanted them used. She hated waste, and you can't keep wearing traveling clothes to work a garden." Eleanor's fingers tightened on the fabric. "Are you sure?" "Wouldn't have offered if I wasn't." He turned, and his expression was gentle. "She's gone, Eleanor. Keeping her clothes folded in a trunk doesn't bring her back. But you're here, alive, needing them. Seems simple to me." It wasn't simple. Eleanor knew that. Knew that giving away a dead wife's belongings was a kind of letting go, a kind of moving forward that some men never managed. But Caleb's face showed no regret, just quiet certainty. "Thank you," Eleanor whispered. She altered the dresses that afternoon, taking them in at the waist and hem, adjusting the shoulders. The work was familiar. She'd been sewing since childhood, one of the few skills her relatives had bothered to teach her. When she put on the first dress the next morning, it fit like it had been made for her. She caught her reflection in the small mirror and barely recognized herself. The woman looking back was tanned and lean, with capable hands and eyes that didn't look away. Not the pale, uncertain girl who'd stepped off the train 6 weeks ago. "Fits you good," Caleb said from the doorway, and Eleanor jumped. He held up his hands apologetically. "Didn't mean to startle you, just wanted to say I'm riding out to check the north fence line. Should be back by evening. You'll be all right here?" "Of course." Eleanor smoothed the dress self-consciously. "I was planning to work on the garden anyway." "Good." Caleb hesitated, then added, "There's a shotgun above the door. You know how to use one?" "No." "Probably should learn. Not much out here that'll bother you, but it pays to be prepared." He pulled the shotgun down and showed her how to load it, how to aim, how to brace for the kick. His hands on hers were impersonal, instructional, but Eleanor felt the warmth of them anyway. "Think you got it?" he asked. "I think so." "Good. Hopefully you never need it, but if you do, don't hesitate. Understood?" Eleanor nodded. Caleb saddled his horse and rode out, and Eleanor was alone with the land and the silence and the strange sense that she was exactly where she belonged. She spent the morning in the garden, then decided to tackle the cabin's interior. It was clean but sparse, and there were things she could do to make it more livable. She found curtain fabric in Sarah's trunk, white muslin with a delicate pattern, and spent the afternoon cutting and hemming panels for the windows. When she hung them, the light that filtered through was softer, warmer. She was standing back to admire her work when she heard hoofbeats approaching fast. Too fast. Eleanor's heart kicked. She grabbed the shotgun from above the door and went outside, the weapon heavy and awkward in her hands. A rider was coming hard from the east, dust rising behind him. Not Caleb. The horse was different, smaller, and the rider's silhouette was wrong. Eleanor raised the shotgun, her hands shaking, and called out as the rider got closer. "That's far enough!" The rider pulled up short, his horse dancing sideways. He was young, maybe 20, with a thin face and nervous eyes. His hands went up immediately. "Easy, ma'am. I'm not here to cause trouble." "Then state your business." Eleanor's voice came out steadier than she felt. "Looking for Caleb Monroe. Need to speak with him urgent-like." "He's not here. Won't be back until evening." The young man swore under his breath, glancing over his shoulder like he expected pursuit. "Can you get a message to him?" "Depends on the message." "Tell him there's trouble in town. William Dockery came back. He's been at the saloon telling anyone who'll listen that Monroe stole his intended bride. Says he's coming out here to claim what's his." The world tilted. Eleanor's grip on the shotgun tightened until her knuckles went white. "What?" "That's what he's saying, ma'am. I figured Monroe should know before Dockery shows up drunk and looking for a fight." The young man's eyes were sympathetic. "You're the lady from Philadelphia, aren't you? The one Dockery sent for?" "I am." Eleanor's voice was ice. "And I'm not his anything. He abandoned me, left before I even arrived." "I believe you, but Dockery's telling a different story. Says he got delayed on business, and when he came back, you'd already run off with Monroe. He's working up a crowd, ma'am. Some of the men are getting riled up about it, talking about property rights and contracts and such." Eleanor felt sick. "We haven't done anything wrong. Caleb gave me shelter because I had nowhere else to go. Don't matter what the truth is if enough people believe the lie." The young man gathered his reins. "I should get back before I'm missed, but tell Monroe what I said. He's a good man, doesn't deserve this." He wheeled his horse and galloped back the way he'd come. Eleanor stood in the yard, the shotgun growing heavier by the second, and tried to think past the panic rising in her throat. William Dockery was back, and he was coming for her. She set the shotgun just inside the door and paced the cabin, her mind racing. She could run. Take one of the horses and head… where? She had no money, no connections, nowhere to go. And running would only confirm whatever lies Dockery was spreading. She could stay and fight. But fight how? She had no legal claim here, no rights, no protection except Caleb's word, and she'd already brought enough trouble to his door. Or she could… The thought crystallized before she could stop it. She could marry Caleb. A legal marriage would give her protection Dockery couldn't contest, would make Caleb's claim to her presence legitimate in the eyes of the law and the community, would end this before it became something worse. But asking that of Caleb meant asking him to bind his life to hers for the sake of convenience. Meant asking him to marry a woman he barely knew because a worthless man was spreading lies. Meant asking him to give up the possibility of finding love again someday with someone he actually wanted. Eleanor pressed her hands to her face and tried to breathe. The sun crawled across the sky. The afternoon heat peaked and began to ease. And still Caleb didn't return. When hoofbeats finally sounded in the yard, Eleanor's entire body went rigid. She grabbed the shotgun and went to the door, only relaxing when she saw Caleb's familiar silhouette. He took one look at her face and dismounted fast. What happened? Eleanor told him everything, the rider, the message, Dockery's return and his lies. Caleb's expression went darker with every word, a cold anger settling over him like frost. "Son of a bitch," he said quietly when she finished. "Coming back after weeks and claiming you're his property. Like your livestock, he left at pasture." "What do we do?" Eleanor hated how small her voice sounded. Caleb was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working. Then he looked at her directly. "We have options. You can leave. I'll give you money, help you get to the next town or territory, set you up somewhere he won't find you. Or you can stay, and we face this together." "I don't want to run." "Then we stand." Caleb's voice was firm. "But Eleanor, you need to understand what that means. Dockery's got the law on his side if he wants to push it. Mail-order bride contracts can be enforced, and even if they can't, he's got public opinion. People in town don't know you. They know him, at least a little. They might take his side. So what do we do?" We make it so he's got no claim. Caleb took a breath. We get married. Eleanor's heart stopped. If you're my wife, legally bound, then he's got nothing. No contract can supersede a marriage. And I'm established here. People know me, know I'm honest. If we present it as a courtship that happened naturally after his abandonment, most folks will accept it. Caleb, I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm offering. His gray-green eyes were steady. I know it's not romantic. I know it's not what either of us imagined. But it solves the problem, gives you protection and security. And truthfully, having a wife wouldn't be a hardship for me. Eleanor searched his face for doubt, for resentment, for any sign this was sacrifice rather than choice. She found none. You'd do this? She asked quietly. Legally bind yourself to me just to keep Dockery from causing trouble? I'd do it because you deserve better than being treated like property. Because you've worked harder in 6 weeks than most people work in 6 months. Because this land feels different with you on it. Better, more alive. And because I meant what I said that first day. You're safe here. Whatever it takes to keep that true, I'll do it. Something broke open in Eleanor's chest. Some wall she'd built to protect herself from hope. What about love? She whispered. Caleb's expression softened. I love Sarah. Loved her deep and true. But she's gone. And I'm still here. And I've learned that love comes in different forms. Maybe we'll never have the romantic kind. But we've got respect, trust, partnership. That's more than most marriages start with. He was right. Eleanor knew he was right. She'd seen enough loveless marriages, enough partnerships built on nothing but obligation and endurance to know that what she and Caleb had, this quiet understanding, this mutual respect, was rare and valuable. If we do this, she said carefully, I need you to know I'll be a real wife. I'll work this land with you, care for the home, stand beside you in whatever comes. This won't be a marriage of convenience on my end. Good. Caleb's mouth curved into something almost like a smile. Because I don't do things halfway. When? Tomorrow. We'll ride into town first thing, find the preacher, make it legal before Dockery has a chance to cause trouble. Eleanor nodded, her heart hammering. Tomorrow then. Caleb reached out and took her hand. The first time he'd initiated touch beyond instruction. His palm was warm and calloused against hers, solid and real. This is your choice, Eleanor. If you want to run instead, I'll help you. No judgment. Eleanor looked at their joined hands, at the cabin behind them with its new curtains and thriving garden, at the land rolling away toward mountains she'd learned to name. She thought about the woman she'd been 6 weeks ago, desperate and abandoned and lost. And she thought about the woman she was becoming, strong and capable and wanted. I choose to stay, she said. I choose you. Caleb's fingers tightened on hers for just a moment. Then he released her hand and stepped back, all business again. Get some rest then. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. That night, Eleanor lay in her bed, Sarah's bed, she supposed, though it felt like hers now, and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow, she'd become Eleanor Monroe. Tomorrow, she'd bind her life to a man she'd known for 6 weeks. Tomorrow, she'd stand in front of a preacher and make vows that would last until death. She should have been terrified. Instead, she felt calm, certain, like she was finally walking towards something instead of running away. When sleep came, it was deep and dreamless. She woke to Caleb's voice outside her door, quiet but urgent. Eleanor, sun's up. We should go soon. She dressed in one of Sarah's altered dresses, the blue one that brought out her eyes, and braided her hair into a crown she pinned securely. No fancy clothes, no jewelry, just herself, plain and honest. When she emerged, Caleb was waiting in clean clothes with his hat in his hands. He'd shaved and combed his hair back, and the formality of it made Eleanor's breath catch. You look nice, he said simply. So do you. They rode into town side by side, the morning air cool and sweet. Caleb kept glancing at her like he was checking to make sure she hadn't changed her mind. Eleanor kept her spine straight and her eyes forward. The town was small, one main street lined with false-fronted buildings, a scattering of houses beyond. People stopped to stare as they rode past. Eleanor felt their eyes like brands, felt their curiosity and speculation, but she didn't look away. Let them stare. By noon, she'd be beyond their judgment. The church was a simple white building at the end of the street. Caleb dismounted and helped Eleanor down, his hands gentle on her waist. Together they walked up the steps and through the door. The preacher was an older man with kind eyes and work-worn hands. He looked up from his Bible as they entered, surprise crossing his face. "Caleb Monroe, didn't expect to see you this morning." "Reverend Hayes," Caleb's voice was respectful but firm. "We're here to be married, today, if you're willing." Reverend Hayes looked between them, his gaze sharpening. "This seems sudden." "It's not as sudden as it looks. Eleanor's been staying at my ranch for 6 weeks now. We'd like to make it proper and legal." "I see." The Reverend's eyes settled on Eleanor. "Miss, are you entering this marriage of your own free will?" "I am." Eleanor's voice didn't waver. "No coercion? No obligation?" "None. I choose this. I choose him." Reverend Hayes studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right then. We'll need witnesses." "I can fetch some folks," Caleb said, but the Reverend held up a hand. "Let me see who's available. Wait here." He disappeared through a side door. Caleb and Eleanor stood in the quiet church, light streaming through plain glass windows, and waited. "You can still change your mind," Caleb said quietly. Eleanor turned to him. "Can you?" "No." "Then neither can I." The Reverend returned with 2 women Eleanor didn't recognize, townswomen in practical dresses with curious but not unkind expressions. They took their places as witnesses, and Reverend Hayes opened his Bible. "Dearly beloved," he began, and Eleanor felt the weight of the moment settle over her like a mantle. She listened to the ancient words about love and commitment and joining together. She felt Caleb's presence beside her, solid and unwavering, and when the Reverend asked if she took this man as her lawfully wedded husband, she said, "I do," with absolute certainty. Caleb's voice was steady when he made his own vow. The Reverend pronounced them husband and wife. "You may kiss the bride," he said. Caleb turned to Eleanor and something passed between them, an understanding, a promise, a beginning. He leaned down and kissed her softly, briefly, his lips warm against hers. It was chaste and careful, but it was real. When he pulled back, Eleanor saw something new in his eyes. Not love, not yet, but possibility. They signed the marriage certificate. The witnesses signed below them. Reverend Hayes blessed them with genuine warmth, and then they were walking back out into the sunlight, married. Eleanor Monroe. The name felt strange and right all at once. They were halfway to their horses when a voice cut across the street. "Well, isn't this convenient?" Eleanor's blood went cold. William Dockery stood outside the saloon, flanked by 2 other men. He was shorter than Eleanor remembered from the daguerreotype he'd sent, with thinning hair and a weak chin. His eyes were bloodshot and mean. Caleb's hand found Eleanor's elbow, steadying. "Dockery," he said evenly. "Heard you were back in town." "Heard you stole my bride." Dockery's voice was slurred, drunk at 10 in the morning. "Heard you took what was mine before I even had a chance to claim it." "She was never yours." Caleb's voice was ice. "You abandoned her, left her standing at your gate with nowhere to go. I gave her shelter, nothing more." "That's not what it looks like from here." Dockery's gaze slid to Eleanor, crawling over her like something dirty. "We had a contract, legal and binding. She was supposed to be my wife." Was being the operative word. Eleanor's voice cut through the tension. She stepped forward, putting herself between Caleb and Dockery. "You disappeared before I arrived. You broke the contract, not me. And now I'm married to a man who actually wanted me." Dockery's face went red. "You little—" "Careful." Caleb's voice dropped to something dangerous. "That's my wife you're talking to." The word wife hung in the air like a challenge. Dockery's eyes narrowed. "You married her? Already? Mighty fast work, Monroe." "Fast enough to make her legally mine, which means you've got no claim, no rights, and no business here." Caleb's hand rested on Eleanor's shoulder, possessive and protective. "Ride out, Dockery. Go back east or go to hell. I don't care which. But you come near my ranch or my wife again, and we'll have problems." For a moment, Eleanor thought Dockery might actually try something. His hands clenched into fists and his face twisted with rage and humiliation. But the two men beside him exchanged glances and stepped back, clearly unwilling to fight Caleb's battle for him. Dockery spat in the dirt. "She's not worth the trouble, anyway. Too plain, too mouthy. You're welcome to her." Eleanor felt Caleb tense beside her, but she put her hand on his arm. "Let it go," she said quietly. "He's not worth it." Caleb looked down at her, and something in his expression shifted. He nodded once, then turned his back on Dockery, a deliberate dismissal. "Come on, Mrs. Monroe, let's go home." They mounted their horses and rode out of town together, husband and wife, leaving William Dockery and his impotent rage in the dust behind them. They didn't speak on the ride back. The horses moved at an easy lope across the open land, hooves drumming a steady rhythm against earth that had baked hard under the summer sun. Eleanor kept her eyes on the horizon, on the mountains rising blue and distant, on anything except the man riding beside her, who was now her husband in the eyes of God and the law. Mrs. Monroe. The name felt like borrowed clothes, not quite hers yet, but something she might grow into with time. When the ranch came into view, Caleb slowed his horse to a walk. Eleanor matched his pace, and they entered the yard side by side. The cabin looked exactly as they'd left it that morning, but everything felt different now. The threshold she was about to cross wasn't just a doorway anymore. It was the entrance to a shared life, a shared home, a shared future that neither of them had planned, but both had chosen. Caleb dismounted and came around to help Eleanor down. His hands on her waist were careful, almost tentative, and when her feet touched the ground, he didn't immediately let go. They stood there in the space between the horses, close enough that Eleanor could see the flecks of green in his gray eyes, could smell leather and sage, and something that was just him. "We should talk," he said quietly. "About what this means. About expectations." Eleanor nodded. Her heart was beating too fast, her palms damp despite the dry heat. "All right." Caleb released her and turned to tend the horses, giving them both something to do with their hands. Eleanor followed him to the barn, watching as he unsaddled the bay with practiced efficiency. When he gestured for her to bring Stella over, she did, and he showed her how to properly remove the saddle and bridle, how to rub the mare down with handfuls of straw. "She did good today," Caleb said, running his hand along Stella's neck. "Steady as they come, like someone else I know." Eleanor glanced at him, surprised by the compliment. "I didn't feel steady. In town, facing Dockery, I wanted to run." "But you didn't. You stood there and looked him in the eye and told him the truth." Caleb moved to hang the saddle on its rack. "That takes more courage than most people have. I had you beside me, and you'll always have me beside you. That's what this means." He turned to face her fully, his expression serious. "Eleanor, I know this isn't a normal marriage. I know we didn't have a courtship or romance or any of the things people usually have before they say vows. But I meant what I said in that church. You're my wife now. That's not just a piece of paper to me." Eleanor's throat tightened. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I'll honor the commitment we made. I'll provide for you, protect you, stand beside you in whatever comes. I'll be faithful to you and respectful of you, and I'll never make you feel like you're an obligation or a burden." He paused, and something vulnerable flickered across his face. "But I also need to know what you expect from me, from this, because I don't want to assume anything." The directness of it, the honesty, made Eleanor's chest ache. She thought about all the ways this conversation could go, all the things she could ask for, or demand, or expect. Security, companionship. Eventually, maybe, love. "I expect partnership," she said finally. "I expect honesty and respect, which you've already given me. I expect to work beside you and build this life together, not just live in it as a guest." She took a breath. "And I expect that if you ever regret this decision, you'll tell me. I don't want to be the wife you tolerate. I want to be the wife you choose every day, or not at all." Caleb's expression softened. "I chose you today. I'll choose you tomorrow, and the day after that." He crossed the distance between them, and for the second time that day, he took her hand. This might have started as a solution to a problem, but that's not what it is anymore. Not for me. What is it then? A beginning. His thumb traced slow circles on the back of her hand. A chance to build something real. Together. Eleanor looked down at their joined hands, his large and scarred, hers smaller and dirt-stained from garden work, and felt something settle into place inside her chest. This wasn't the fairy tale she'd imagined as a girl. There was no grand passion, no sweeping declaration of eternal love, but there was something better, something solid and true. "I can work with a beginning," she said softly. Caleb's smile was small but genuine. "Good, because I'm not much for fairy tales anyway." He released her hand and stepped back, the moment passing into something more practical. "We should celebrate. Not much, but something. You got married today. That deserves more than just going back to regular chores." Eleanor laughed, surprised by the sound of it. "What did you have in mind?" "There's a bottle of wine Sarah's mother sent us years ago. Been saving it for something worth celebrating." Caleb headed for the cabin, and Eleanor followed. "And I could ride over to the Hendersons' place, see if Martha's got fresh eggs. You could make something special for dinner." "The Hendersons?" "Neighbors about 3 miles north. Good people. They'll want to meet you anyway once word gets around about the wedding." He pulled the wine bottle from a high shelf, dusting it off. "Which it will, probably by tomorrow." Eleanor hadn't thought about that, about how their sudden marriage would be the talk of every ranch and homestead for miles around, about how she'd be measured and judged by women she'd never met, weighed against Sarah's memory and found wanting or acceptable or somewhere in between. "What will people think?" she asked. Caleb set the bottle down and looked at her directly. "Some will think I married too fast. Some will think you're an opportunist. Some will think it's romantic. And some won't think anything at all because they've got their own lives to worry about." He crossed his arms. "But what matters is what we think, what we know to be true. The rest is just noise. I'm not used to ignoring noise. Then I'll teach you, same as I taught you to ride." His voice gentled. "You belong here now, Eleanor. On this land, in this life. No one gets to tell you otherwise." The fierce protectiveness in his tone made Eleanor's eyes sting. She blinked hard and nodded. "I'll start on dinner then, if you're getting eggs. I'll be back within the hour." He left, and Eleanor stood alone in the cabin that was now truly hers. She looked around with new eyes, seeing not what it lacked, but what it could become. The curtains she'd made softened the light. The garden outside would keep them fed through winter. The bed in the front room, her room, their room, she'd have to figure that out eventually, was comfortable enough. This was home now. She set to work preparing dinner with a focus that bordered on obsessive. She mixed dough for biscuits, prepared beans with salt pork and herbs from the garden, sliced carrots thin and uniform. When Caleb returned with a basket of eggs and fresh butter from Martha Henderson, Eleanor cracked 3 of them into a bowl and whipped them smooth for a custard she'd make later. They worked together in the small kitchen space, moving around each other with surprising ease. Caleb built up the fire. Eleanor slid the biscuits into the Dutch oven. He set the table with Sarah's blue-patterned dishes. She poured water into tin cups and wished they were crystal. When the food was ready, they sat across from each other at the scarred wooden table, and Caleb opened the wine. It was dark and rich and tasted of cherries and something Eleanor couldn't name. She took a small sip and felt warmth spread through her chest. "To new beginnings," Caleb said, raising his cup. "To partnership," Eleanor replied, touching her cup to his. They ate slowly, savoring the simple meal that felt special just because of the day it marked. Caleb complimented the biscuits 3 times. Eleanor watched him eat with an appetite born of hard work and honest hunger, and felt pride in being able to feed him well. When the dishes were cleared and washed and the sun was painting the sky in shades of copper and gold, they took their wine outside to the bench. The evening was perfect, warm but not hot, with a breeze carrying the smell of grass and water and growing things. "Tell me about Sarah," Eleanor said quietly. "If you're willing, I'd like to know about her." Caleb was silent for so long Eleanor thought he might refuse. Then he spoke, his voice low and remembering. "She was strong. Not in a loud way, but in a way that mattered. When we came out here, she saw this empty land and didn't flinch. Just rolled up her sleeves and helped me build the cabin, dig the well, plant the first garden." He stared out at the darkening horizon. "She could ride better than most men, could shoot straight, could birth a calf and bake bread and mend anything that needed mending. But what I remember most is how she'd sing while she worked, old hymns mostly, said it made the work go faster." Eleanor tried to imagine a woman like that, competent and fearless and comfortable in her own skin. She felt inadequate by comparison. "I'm not her," Eleanor said softly. "I can't ride like that or shoot or any of it. Not yet, anyway." "I know, and I'm not asking you to be her." Caleb turned to look at Eleanor, and his eyes were kind. Sarah was Sarah. You're you. That's enough. More than enough. What if it's not? What if I can't be the kind of wife this land needs? You already are. Caleb gestured toward the garden, thriving and green in the last light. You took something that was dying and brought it back to life. You learned to ride in 6 weeks when some people take years. You stood up to Dockery when you could have crumbled. You say yes to hard work and no to giving up. He paused. That's exactly the kind of wife this land needs, the kind I need. The words settled over Eleanor like a benediction. She wanted to believe them, wanted to trust that she could be enough for this life, this man, this vast and demanding frontier, but doubt was a hard habit to break. "What happens now?" she asked. "Tonight, the sleeping arrangements." Caleb's jaw tightened. "That's your choice. The front room is yours. I'll stay in the barn like always until you say otherwise. There's no pressure, no expectations. We're married legally, but what that means beyond that is something we figure out together." Relief and something else, disappointment maybe, washed through Eleanor. "You do that? Even though we're married?" "I do that because we're married. Because marriage means respecting each other, and I respect you too much to assume anything." He finished his wine and stood. "I should check on the animals before full dark. You get some rest. It's been a long day." He was halfway to the barn before Eleanor called out. "Caleb?" He turned. "Thank you. For today. For everything." "Nothing to thank me for. We're partners now, remember? Partners don't keep score." He disappeared into the barn, and Eleanor sat alone in the gathering darkness, listening to night sounds and trying to understand the tangle of emotions in her chest. She wanted him to stay, wanted him to choose the cabin, the front room, her. But she also needed the space he was giving her, needed time to adjust to this new reality where she was someone's wife, and this was someone's home, and she had value beyond what she could offer. Eventually she went inside, bolted the front room door out of habit, and lay in the bed that still smelled faintly of cedar and sage. Sleep came slowly, and when it did, her dreams were full of gray-green eyes and strong hands and the feeling of being chosen. The next morning brought visitors. Eleanor was working in the garden when she heard horses approaching. She straightened, shading her eyes against the sun, and saw 2 women riding into the yard. Both were dressed in practical calico. Both sat their horses with easy confidence. The older one had silver threading through dark hair and sharp, assessing eyes. The younger was maybe Eleanor's age, with freckles and a friendly smile. Caleb emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on his trousers. "Martha, Claire, wasn't expecting you this morning. Heard you got married yesterday," the older woman, Martha, said bluntly. "Figured we'd come meet the new Mrs. Monroe. See if she's real or just frontier gossip." Eleanor's face heated, but she forced herself to step forward. "I'm real. Eleanor Monroe. Pleased to meet you." Martha dismounted with a grunt and looked Eleanor up and down like she was evaluating livestock. You're the one Dockery sent for and abandoned?" "I am." "And you married Caleb the day after Dockery showed back up in town, claiming you were his property?" "I married Caleb because I chose him. Dockery's claims are irrelevant." Martha's eyes narrowed, then something like approval flickered across her face. "Fair enough. I'm Martha Henderson. This is my daughter Claire. We ranch north of here, and we brought you a wedding gift." Claire dismounted and pulled a cloth-wrapped bundle from her saddlebag. "It's not much. Just some preserves and a loaf of bread. And Mama made you a quilt." She handed the bundle to Eleanor with a shy smile. "Welcome to the territory." Eleanor took the bundle, throat tight. The quilt was beautiful, simple squares and blues and greens and golds, stitched with care. "I don't know what to say. Thank you." "Say you'll come have supper with us sometime," Martha said, "and that you'll bring this one along." She jerked her chin toward Caleb. "He's been keeping to himself too long. Time he rejoined the living." Caleb's ears went red, but he nodded. "Appreciate the invitation, Martha." "Don't appreciate it. Accept it. Martha's voice softened slightly. You're family now, both of you. That means something out here. Means you're not alone. The words hit Eleanor harder than she expected. Family. She'd never had that. Not really. Not in any way that mattered. And here were these women, strangers an hour ago, offering it like it was simple. We'll come, Eleanor managed. Thank you. They visited for another hour, Martha asking pointed questions about Eleanor's background and skills while Claire chattered about the upcoming harvest dance and who was courting whom. Eleanor answered honestly, not trying to be anything other than what she was, a city girl learning to be a frontier woman. When they finally rode out, Martha called back, You need anything? You send word. And Eleanor, don't let the gossips get to you. You've got a good man there. Anyone with eyes can see you're good for each other. Eleanor watched them disappear across the prairie, clutching the quilt to her chest. Told you they were good people, Caleb said quietly. They are. Eleanor looked up at him. Do you think she's right? That we're good for each other? I think we're becoming good for each other, which is maybe better. He touched her shoulder briefly, a gesture of comfort. Come on, that garden won't weed itself. They fell back into work, but something had shifted. The cabin felt less like Caleb's space and more like theirs. The ranch felt less like borrowed shelter and more like home. And Eleanor felt less like a guest and more like someone who belonged. That evening, after dinner, Eleanor made a decision. I'd like to move some of my things into the main room, she said. Make space in the front room for other uses. A sewing area maybe, or storage. Caleb looked up from the book he was reading. You sure? I'm sure. This is my home now. I should stop hiding in one room like I might have to leave any moment. Eleanor met his eyes steadily. Unless you'd rather I didn't. I'd rather you felt comfortable doing whatever makes this feel like home. He closed his book. I can help move things tomorrow. Thank you. That night, Eleanor left the front room door open. She didn't invite Caleb in, didn't ask him to leave the barn, but the open door was a statement, a small surrender of the defenses she'd been maintaining. The days settled into a new rhythm after that. Eleanor moved her belongings gradually, claiming space in the main room. She hung her dresses beside where Caleb hung his shirts. She set her hairbrush on a shelf next to his shaving things. Small declarations of permanence. Caleb noticed each one but didn't comment, just made room and adjusted and continued treating her with the same steady respect he'd shown from the beginning. They worked the ranch together. Eleanor learned to milk the cow Caleb bought from a neighbor. She learned to make cheese and butter, to preserve vegetables from the garden, to mend fences and brand calves. Her hands grew harder, her body stronger. She could ride Stella at a gallop now, could shoot the shotgun without flinching, could work from dawn to dusk without collapsing. But more than the physical skills, she was learning the rhythms of this life. The way weather dictated everything. The way community meant survival. The way silence could be companionable instead of lonely. And she was learning Caleb. She learned that he sang under his breath while he worked, old war songs and trail ballads. That he read poetry at night when he thought no one was watching. That he had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh. That he was unfailingly gentle with animals and children, but had no patience for cruelty or laziness in adults. She learned that he still grieved Sarah, but wasn't trapped by that grief. That he could talk about his late wife without pain, could share memories without it meaning he was living in the past. And she learned that he watched her sometimes when he thought she wasn't looking, his expression unguarded and something like wonder in his eyes. 6 weeks after their wedding, the land assessor came. He was a thin man with a pinched face and a clipboard, representing some Eastern investment company that held the note on Caleb's property. He rode into the yard on a rented horse, dismounted without greeting, and announced he was there to verify land improvements and property value. Caleb's jaw went tight, but he nodded politely. Whatever you need to see. The assessor spent 2 hours walking the property, making notes, asking questions. He inspected the cabin, the barn, the fences, the garden. He counted cattle and horses. He measured and calculated and wrote everything down with sharp, efficient strokes. Eleanor followed behind, anxiety building with each notation. This land was Caleb's livelihood, his home. If the assessor found it lacking, if the investment company decided the improvements weren't sufficient, who's the woman? the assessor asked suddenly, nodding toward Eleanor. My wife, Caleb said flatly. Wife. The assessor made another note. When did you marry? 6 weeks ago. And before that? Before that is none of your concern. The assessor's smile was thin and unpleasant. Everything's my concern when it comes to verifying claim validity. The Homestead Act requires certain conditions be met. Married residence, demonstrated cultivation, permanent structures. I'm here to verify you've met those requirements. Which I have. We'll see. The assessor closed his notebook. I'll submit my report to the company. They'll make a determination about whether your claim is sufficient to maintain the loan terms or if adjustments need to be made. What kind of adjustments? Eleanor asked before she could stop herself. The assessor's gaze slid to her. That depends on the company's assessment, ma'am. Could be nothing. Could be increased payments. Could be foreclosure if they determine the land isn't being utilized to sufficient economic potential. Caleb stepped forward, his voice dropping to something dangerous. I've met every payment on time. I've improved this land every year I've been here. I've broken my back making this place productive. They've got no grounds for foreclosure. They've got whatever grounds the contract says they do. The assessor mounted his horse. You'll receive notification of their decision within 30 days. Good day. He rode out without looking back. Caleb stood rigid in the yard, hands clenched into fists, watching until the assessor disappeared from view. Then he turned and slammed his fist into the fence post hard enough that Eleanor heard wood crack. Caleb, they're going to try to take it. His voice was raw. That's what this was. They're looking for any excuse to claim I'm not meeting requirements so they can foreclose and resell to someone who'll pay more. Eleanor's heart hammered. Can they do that? Even if you've met all the terms? They can do whatever they want if they've got lawyers and I don't. Caleb's shoulders sagged. I put everything I had into this place. Every dollar, every hour, every piece of myself. And they can just take it because some company back east decided they can make more money selling to someone else. Eleanor crossed to him and took his hand, pulling it away from the fence. His knuckles were bleeding. She held his hand gently, carefully, and met his eyes. They haven't taken anything yet, and they won't. We won't let them. We, Caleb's voice cracked on the word. We. Eleanor's voice was fierce. This is my home too now. My land, my life, and I'll be damned if I let some Eastern investor steal it because they think they can. She tightened her grip on his hand. What do we need to do? To prove the claim is valid? To show we've met every requirement? Caleb stared at her for a long moment, and Eleanor saw the exact second something shifted. When he stopped seeing her as someone to protect and started seeing her as someone fighting beside him. We need to document everything, show continuous improvement, prove cultivation and permanent residence. His voice steadied. And we need to make sure there's no question we're a legitimate married couple building a legitimate homestead. Eleanor understood what he wasn't saying. They could claim our marriage is fraudulent, that it was just for the claim. They could try. Then we make it impossible for them to claim that. Eleanor released his hand and straightened her spine. We live as husband and wife in every way that matters. We build this place together. We make it so clear we belong here that no company and no assessor can question it. Caleb's eyes searched hers. Are you sure? Because once we start down that road, there's no going back to separate rooms and careful distance. Eleanor thought about the open door she'd left all week, about the way she'd been gradually claiming space in the cabin, about how Caleb's presence had stopped feeling like an intrusion and started feeling necessary. I'm sure, she said. I choose this. I choose you. Not just on paper. For real. Something blazed in Caleb's expression. Relief and hope and something that might have been love starting to take root. He cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle despite the roughness of his palms. Eleanor Monroe, he said quietly, you're the bravest person I've ever met. Then he kissed her, and this time it wasn't careful or chaste. It was claiming and promising and full of everything they hadn't yet said out loud. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Eleanor smiled. Come on, husband, we've got a homestead to save. They worked like the land itself depended on their effort, because it did. Every morning before the sun cleared the mountains,
Eleanor and Caleb were already moving. They documented everything with a precision that bordered on obsessive. Every fence repaired, every crop planted, every improvement made to the property. Caleb kept a ledger now, his rough handwriting filling pages with dates and details and measurements. Eleanor sketched maps of the garden plots, the irrigation channels they'd dug, the new chicken coop Caleb had built in 3 days of furious labor. But beyond the documentation, they were building something else. Something harder to measure, but infinitely more valuable. Eleanor moved into the main bedroom without ceremony or discussion. One evening, she simply carried her nightgown and brush into the room where Caleb slept, set them on the washstand beside his shaving kit, and met his eyes with steady determination. "Is this all right?" she asked.
Caleb's throat worked. More than all right. That first night they lay beside each other in the darkness, careful not to touch, both acutely aware of the other's breathing and warmth. Eleanor stared at the ceiling and tried to calm her racing heart. She'd shared a bed with her young cousins in Philadelphia, but this was different. This was a man, her husband, someone who had every legal right to expect things from her that she wasn't sure she knew how to give. "Eleanor," Caleb's voice was quiet in the darkness. "We don't have to. I'm not expecting. I know." She turned her head on the pillow to look at him. His profile was barely visible in the moonlight filtering through the window. "But I want us to be real. Not just for the assessor, for us. We are real. Then let's stop being so careful with each other." Eleanor reached out and found his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "I'm tired of feeling like I might break something, like we might break something." Caleb's fingers tightened on hers. "What do you want?" "I want to stop sleeping on opposite edges of the bed like we're afraid to touch. I want to wake up next to you and not feel like I'm trespassing. I want this to feel like what it is. A marriage." She felt rather than saw Caleb turn toward her. His free hand came up to brush hair from her face, his touch gentle and wondering. "I want that too," he admitted. "Been wanting it, but I didn't want to push, didn't want you to feel obligated." "I don't feel obligated, I feel—" Eleanor searched for the right word. "Ready, scared maybe, but ready." Caleb leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he kissed her with a tenderness that made her chest ache. It was different from the fierce kiss in the yard after the assessor left. This was patient, exploratory, asking rather than claiming. Eleanor kissed him back, her hands finding the solid warmth of his shoulders, and let herself fall into it. There was awkwardness, bumped noses and uncertain hands, and the strange newness of learning someone's body. But there was also sweetness and care and the gradual understanding that this was safe. That Caleb would never take more than she offered, would never make her feel like anything less than cherished. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Caleb pressed his forehead to hers. "We'll figure this out together," he said. "No rush. No expectations beyond what we both want." "What do you want?" "You. However you're willing to have me." His voice was rough with honesty. "But I want you choosing me because you want to, not because you think you have to." Eleanor's answer was to pull him back down, to kiss him again with more confidence, to show him without words that this was her choice. Freely made and honestly given. They didn't consummate the marriage that night. They simply held each other, traded kisses and touches and quiet words, and learned the shape of being together. It was enough. More than enough. When Eleanor woke the next morning, she was curved against Caleb's side, his arm around her shoulders and her head pillowed on his chest. She could hear his heartbeat, steady and strong, and feel the rise and fall of his breathing. The intimacy of it should have felt strange. Instead, it felt right, like something she'd been missing without knowing it. Caleb stirred beneath her, and his arm tightened briefly before relaxing. "Morning," he murmured, his voice sleep rough. "Good morning." Eleanor tilted her head back to look at him. His hair was mussed, and there was a crease on his cheek from the pillow. He looked younger like this, unguarded. "Did you sleep well?" "Better than I have in 3 years." He met her eyes, and there was such open warmth there that Eleanor's breath caught. "You?" "The same. But she—" They lay there for another few minutes, neither willing to break the spell. Then the rooster crowed, and reality reasserted itself. Work to be done. A homestead to save. They rose and dressed with new ease, no longer turning their backs for privacy, but not quite comfortable with complete openness either. Somewhere in between, still learning. Over breakfast, biscuits and bacon and coffee strong enough to wake the dead, Caleb laid out his plan. I'm riding into town today. Going to talk to the land office, make sure all our documentation is filed properly. Then I'm going to find the best lawyer within 50 miles and see what our options are if the company does try to foreclose. Eleanor poured herself more coffee. I'm coming with you. You don't have to. I know I don't have to, but we're in this together, remember? Besides, I want to stop by the mercantile. We need supplies, and I want to introduce myself properly to the town. Let people see that we're a real couple building a real life. Caleb studied her for a moment, then nodded. All right, we'll go together. The ride into town was different this time. They rode side by side in companionable silence, Eleanor no longer nervous on horseback, but actually enjoying the rhythm of it. The morning was clear and cool, the kind of perfect late summer day that made Montana feel like paradise. The town was busier than Eleanor remembered from their hasty wedding day. Wagons lined the main street, farmers and ranchers conducting business, women shopping at the mercantile with children in tow. People stopped and stared as Eleanor and Caleb rode past, but this time Eleanor didn't look away. She met their eyes and nodded politely, marking faces and filing away reactions. They stopped first at the land office, a cramped building that smelled of paper and dust. The clerk, a nervous man with ink-stained fingers, pulled Caleb's file and spread the documents across a scarred wooden counter. Everything appears to be in order, Mr. Monroe. You've filed all required improvements, your payments are current, and your marriage certificate is on record. The clerk adjusted his spectacles. What exactly are you concerned about? Had an assessor out last week. Seemed more interested in finding problems than verifying improvements. Caleb's tone was carefully neutral. Want to make sure there's nothing in my file that could be used against me if the company decides to make trouble. The clerk's expression shifted to something sympathetic. Ah, Eastern Capital Investment Group? That's the one. They've been aggressive lately, bought up a lot of notes from smaller lenders, and now they're looking to maximize returns. Had 3 foreclosures in the past 6 months, all on land that technically met the requirements but got caught up in contract technicalities. The clerk lowered his voice. Off the record, document everything. Every nail you hammer, every seed you plant, and get a lawyer to review your contract for loopholes. Already planning on it. Who's the best around here? Samuel Thornton, office above the bank. He's expensive, but he knows land law better than anyone in the territory. Fought 2 foreclosures last year and won both. Caleb thanked him, and they left, Eleanor's hand tucked into the crook of his elbow. The casual intimacy of it still felt new, but she was learning to accept his touch without hesitation. The lawyer's office was exactly as described. A cramped space above the bank, lined with law books and smelling of cigar smoke. Samuel Thornton himself was a bear of a man with white hair and shrewd eyes that missed nothing. He listened to Caleb's situation without interrupting, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. When Caleb finished, Thornton leaned back in his chair and studied them both. They're testing you, he said bluntly. Eastern Capital does this, buys up notes, sends assessors to find any excuse for foreclosure, then resells the improved land at twice the price. It's legal, barely, and it's effective because most homesteaders don't have the resources to fight back. We have resources, Eleanor said firmly. We have documentation and determination. What else do we need? Thornton's bushy eyebrows rose. Spirit, apparently, which is good, because you'll need it. He pulled out paper and began making notes. I'll need to review your complete contract, all improvement records, and your financial documentation. Then I'll prepare a defense package in case they do file for foreclosure. My retainer is $50, and if this goes to court, it'll be more. Caleb's jaw tightened. $50 was a significant sum, but he nodded. Done. When do you need the documents? Soon as possible. And Mr. Monroe? Thornton's gaze sharpened. Make absolutely certain there's no question about the legitimacy of your marriage. That's the angle they'll use if they can. They'll claim it was a fraudulent arrangement to meet homestead requirements. Our marriage is legitimate, Caleb said flatly. I'm sure it is. But can you prove it? In court, to a judge who's looking for any excuse to side with the company that pays more in taxes than all the homesteaders combined? Eleanor felt Caleb tense beside her. She squeezed his arm and spoke before he could. What would constitute proof, Mr. Thornton? Witnesses to an established courtship, evidence of cohabitation and shared domestic life, testimony from neighbors about your relationship, ideally a pregnancy, though I understand that's not something you can produce on demand. He said it clinically, like he was discussing livestock breeding. Eleanor felt heat climb her neck but kept her voice steady. We can provide witnesses. We've been living as husband and wife since our marriage. Our neighbors can testify to that. Good. Get statements from them if you can. Letters, signed testimonies, anything that establishes you as a genuine married couple building a legitimate homestead. Thornton stood, signaling the meeting's end. Bring me those documents within the week. I'll start building your case. They left the office in silence, both processing the weight of what they'd just learned. The fight they were facing wasn't just about land or money. It was about proving that their marriage, their life together, was real and worth protecting. We should eat something before we head back, Caleb said as they descended the stairs. There's a decent restaurant near the Mercantile. They found a small establishment with checkered tablecloths and the smell of fresh bread. The proprietor, a plump woman with kind eyes, showed them to a table by the window and brought coffee without being asked. Heard you two got married, she said with a smile. About time someone made an honest man of Caleb Monroe. I'm Mrs. Patterson. You need anything while you're in town, you let me know. Thank you, Eleanor said, surprised by the warmth. We appreciate that. They ordered stew and bread, and while they waited, Eleanor watched the town move past the window. She saw women shopping with purpose, men conducting business with handshakes and direct words, children running between buildings with the fearless energy of youth. This was her community now, for better or worse. These were the people who would judge her, support her, or ignore her depending on what she proved herself to be. What are you thinking? Caleb asked quietly. That I want to belong here, really belong, not just be tolerated. Eleanor turned from the window to look at him. I want people to see me as your wife, as someone who contributes, as someone who matters. You already matter. To you, maybe. But to them? She gestured toward the window. I'm still the mail-order bride who showed up and caused trouble. The woman who married you 6 weeks after arriving. Some probably think I trapped you. Some probably think you're a fool. Caleb's hand covered hers on the table. Then we prove them wrong. Together. Same way we're proving the company wrong. His thumb traced circles on her palm. You are my wife, Eleanor. Not on paper, not just legally. You're the person I wake up next to and work beside and sit with in the evenings. You're the reason this place feels like home again instead of just a place I survive. And anyone who can't see that isn't worth concerning yourself over. The simple honesty of it made Eleanor's eyes sting. She blinked hard and squeezed his hand. When did you become so good with words? When I found someone worth saying them to. Their food arrived, and they ate in comfortable silence, the kind that came from growing familiar with each other. Afterward, they walked to the Mercantile where Eleanor made her purchases: flour, sugar, fabric for new curtains, seeds for the fall planting. The proprietor, a rail-thin man named Mr. Hastings, watched her with open curiosity. Settling in all right out at the Monroe place? He asked as he tallied her purchases. Very well, thank you. The land is beautiful. Caleb's a good man. Lost a lot when Sarah passed. Glad to see him moving forward. It was said kindly, without judgment. You need anything? Credit's good here. Caleb always pays his debts. I appreciate that, but we'll pay cash today. Eleanor counted out the money carefully, aware that every transaction was being watched and assessed by the other customers in the store. As they loaded the supplies into the saddlebags, a woman approached them. She was younger than Eleanor, heavily pregnant, with a toddler clinging to her skirts. Mrs. Monroe? I'm Rebecca Mills. My husband Tom and I ranch about 5 miles south of you. She shifted the child to her other hip. I wanted to introduce myself. It's nice having another woman nearby. Gets lonely out here sometimes. Eleanor felt something warm bloom in her chest.
It's lovely to meet you, Mrs. Mills. Please, call me Eleanor. Rebecca, then. The younger woman smiled shyly. I'm having a quilting circle next week at my place. Just a few of us neighbor women. Would you like to come? I know you're probably busy getting settled, but I'd love to, Eleanor said immediately. Thank you for the invitation. They made arrangements, and as Rebecca walked away, Eleanor turned to find Caleb watching her with something like pride. What? She asked. Nothing, just, you're good at this.
At making connections, building community. He adjusted the saddlebags. It matters more than you know. Out here, neighbors can mean the difference between surviving and thriving. They rode home as the sun began its descent toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Eleanor felt the weight of the day settling into her bones, the worry about the land, the determination to fight, the small victories of connection and acceptance. When they reached the ranch, Caleb helped her dismount, and his hands lingered on her waist. Thank you, he said quietly, for standing with me today, for being willing to fight for this. It's my fight too now, my land, my home. Eleanor rose on her toes and kissed him briefly. I'm not going anywhere. That night they worked together to prepare dinner, moving around the small kitchen with increasing familiarity. Eleanor made chicken and dumplings, while Caleb cleaned the day's dishes and set the table. When they sat down to eat, he reached across and took her hand. Should we say grace? Eleanor asked, surprising herself. Caleb looked equally surprised, but nodded. He bowed his head and spoke simple words of thanks for the food, the land, the home they were building together. Eleanor added her own silent prayer, for strength, for wisdom, for the ability to prove that what they had was worth protecting. After dinner, they sat on the porch bench and watched night settle over the prairie. The air was cooling, carrying hints of the autumn that would come soon. Eleanor leaned against Caleb's shoulder and felt his arm come around her. Tell me about your life before, she said. Before Montana. Before Sarah. I want to know who you were. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he began to speak, his voice low and remembering. I grew up in Ohio. Small farm, big family. I was the youngest of 6, and there wasn't much room for me to make a mark. When the war started, I enlisted partly for the cause, and partly because I needed to find out who I was beyond someone's younger brother. He paused. Fought with the Union, saw things no one should see, lost friends, lost parts of myself I'll never get back. Eleanor stayed quiet, letting him speak at his own pace. After the war, I couldn't go back to Ohio. Couldn't pretend to be the boy who'd left. Met Sarah at a church social in Illinois. She'd lost family too, understood what it was like to need a fresh start. We got married and came west because we wanted to build something that mattered, something clean and new that wasn't touched by war or death or old hurts. And did you? Build something that mattered? We started to. Then she got sick and his voice caught. And I was alone again. Spent 3 years working this land and telling myself it was enough. That if I just kept moving, kept building, I wouldn't have to face the emptiness. Eleanor reached up and touched his face, turning him to look at her. And now? Now I'm not empty anymore. His eyes held hers. You filled spaces I didn't know I still had. Made me want things I thought I was done wanting. Made me believe in building something that lasts. I want that too, Eleanor whispered. I want to build something that lasts. With you. Caleb kissed her then, slow and deep and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, he stood and offered his hand. Come to bed with me, he said. Not because we have to prove anything to anyone, just because I want to hold you, because you're my wife and I'm your husband and this is our life. Eleanor took his hand and let him lead her inside. That night they made love for the first time, and it was awkward and tender and nothing like the clinical descriptions Eleanor had heard from married women in Philadelphia. It was Caleb's hands shaking as he touched her. It was Eleanor's nervous laughter when they bumped noses. It was the slow discovery of what pleased and what comforted and what made them both gasp. And it was the aftermath, lying tangled together in the darkness, sweat cooling on their skin, hearts gradually slowing to normal rhythm. Caleb's hand traced lazy patterns on Eleanor's bare shoulder, and she pressed her face against his chest and felt tears she couldn't name slip down her cheeks. "Eleanor? Did I hurt you?" Caleb's voice was immediately concerned. No, you didn't hurt me." She pressed closer. I never thought I'd have this. Any of this. I thought I'd end up some man's obligation, tolerated at best. And instead, I have you. I have this. I have a home and a partner. And—" Her voice broke. Caleb's arms tightened around her. I know, sweetheart. I never thought I'd have this again either. Thought that part of my life was done. But here you are. Here we are." They held each other until the tears stopped, and Eleanor's breathing evened out. Then Caleb pulled the quilt over them both, and they slept, bodies curved together like they'd been doing it for years instead of one night. The next morning, Eleanor woke to an empty bed and a moment of panic before she heard Caleb moving in the main room. She dressed quickly and found him at the table, the ledger open in front of him and papers spread everywhere. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked. "Woke up thinking about what Thornton said, about documentation." He gestured at the papers. "I'm going through everything, making sure we have proof of every improvement, every expense, every hour of labor. It's got to be ironclad." Eleanor poured coffee and sat beside him. "Then let's make it ironclad. What do you need me to do?" They spent the next week systematically documenting their homestead. Eleanor wrote detailed accounts of the garden, what was planted where, yields from each crop, improvements made to irrigation and soil quality. Caleb measured and mapped every fence line, every structure, every cleared acre. Together they went to the Hendersons and the Mills and 3 other neighboring families, collecting signed statements attesting to their relationship, their work ethic, their commitment to the land. Martha Henderson was blunt in her testimony. "Known Caleb Monroe for 6 years. He's honest, hardworking, and devoted to that land. His wife Eleanor is cut from the same cloth. They're building something real out there, and any fool can see it." Rebecca Mills added her own statement, noting that Eleanor had attended the quilting circle and fit in naturally with the other ranch wives, sharing recipes and advice, and building the kind of connections that defined frontier community. By the end of the week, they had a stack of documents 3 inches thick. Caleb bundled them carefully and rode into town alone to deliver them to Thornton, leaving Eleanor to manage the ranch for the day. She used the time to harvest the last of the summer vegetables and begin preparing the garden for autumn planting. The work was meditative, giving her hands something to do while her mind churned over everything that could go wrong. The company could still foreclose. The judge could side with Eastern money over frontier homesteaders. They could lose everything they'd built, but they could also win. They could prove that their claim was legitimate, their marriage real, their right to this land absolute. Eleanor was pulling carrots when she heard hoofbeats. She straightened, shading her eyes, and felt her stomach drop. William Dockery sat astride a rented horse at the edge of their property, watching her. She thought about running for the shotgun, thought about screaming for help even though Caleb was miles away. Then she straightened her spine, wiped dirt from her hands, and walked toward him with her head high. "You're trespassing, Mr. Dockery." "Just came to talk." His words were slurred, drunk again. "See the woman who was supposed to be mine. I was never yours, and I never will be." Eleanor stopped 10 feet away, close enough to be heard but far enough to run if needed. "Leave. Now. Or what? You'll tell your husband?" Dockery's laugh was ugly. "Heard he's in town. Heard you're having money trouble. Heard that fancy ranch you stole from me is about to be taken by the bank." Eleanor's hands clenched. "How did you—" "Town talk, sweetheart. Everyone knows the Monroes are one bad assessment away from losing everything." He leaned forward in the saddle. "When that happens, you'll need somewhere to go. I'm willing to overlook your indiscretion, take you on despite what you've become." The sheer audacity of it stole Eleanor's breath. This man, who'd abandoned her, lied about her, shown nothing but contempt for her, actually thought she'd crawl back to him. "I'd rather starve," she said with perfect clarity. "I'd rather freeze to death in winter. I'd rather do anything at all than spend one moment as your wife." Dockery's face went red with rage. He dismounted and took a step toward her. Eleanor ran. She made it 3 strides before he grabbed her arm, spinning her around with enough force to make her stumble. His breath was sour with whiskey, his grip bruising. "You ungrateful little—" The shotgun blast split the air like thunder. Both Eleanor and Dockery froze. Then Eleanor saw Caleb standing beside the barn, the smoking shotgun pointed skyward, his face carved from granite. "Get off my wife." Each word was its own sentence, cold and absolutely final. Dockery released Eleanor's arm like it had burned him. She stumbled back, putting distance between them, and Caleb was there immediately, stepping between them, the shotgun now pointed at chest level. "I'm going to say this once," Caleb said, his voice deadly calm. "You come onto my land again. You touch my wife again. You so much as look in her direction, and I will end you. I don't care about consequences. I don't care about the law. You will not threaten what's mine. She's my wife, legally, morally, and in every way that matters, and you're done." Caleb took a step forward, and Dockery actually backed up. "Mount your horse and ride out. If I ever see you again, I won't fire a warning shot." Dockery scrambled onto his horse, his hands shaking. He looked at Eleanor one last time, and whatever he saw on her face made him flinch. Then he was gone, galloping away like hell itself was chasing him. Caleb lowered the shotgun and turned to Eleanor, his face transforming from rage to concern in an instant. "Are you hurt? Did he—" "I'm fine. Scared, but fine." Eleanor's hands were shaking. She pressed them against her thighs to still them. "How did you know to come back?" "Got a bad feeling halfway to town. Turned around." Caleb set the shotgun aside and pulled Eleanor into his arms. "Should have killed him. Should have—" "You did exactly right." Eleanor pressed her face against his chest and let herself shake. "You protected me. That's all I needed." They stood there in the yard holding each other while the adrenaline slowly drained away. When Eleanor finally pulled back, Caleb's eyes were still dark with anger. "He's not going to stop," Caleb said. "Men like him don't. They see rejection as a challenge. Then we'll deal with it, together." Eleanor took his hand. "Did you deliver the documents to Thornton?" "I did. He seemed pleased with what we'd gathered, said he'd have a preliminary review ready in a few days." Caleb's expression softened. "Eleanor, I need you to know something. Whatever happens with the land, with the company, with Dockery, you're what matters. You. Not the ranch, not the homestead. You." Eleanor's throat tightened. "The land matters too. It's our future." "Land can be replaced. You can't." He cupped her face in his hands. "If we lose this place, we'll find another. If we have to start over, we start over. But I won't lose you. Not to Dockery, not to fear, not to anything." She kissed him then, pouring everything she couldn't say into it, gratitude and fear and love that was taking root despite everything. When they finally broke apart, Eleanor took a shaky breath. "Let's go inside. I need to feel safe for a while." Caleb led her into the cabin and bolted the door. That night they made love again, and it was different from the first time, more urgent, more desperate, like they were both trying to prove they were alive and together and unbroken. Afterward, lying in the darkness with Caleb's heartbeat steady beneath her ear, Eleanor made herself a promise. Whatever it took, whatever they had to fight, she would not let anyone take this from them. Not Dockery, not the company, not fate itself. This was hers. He was hers. And she would defend it with everything she had. The letter from Eastern Capital Investment Group arrived on a Tuesday morning 3 weeks after Dockery's confrontation, delivered by a nervous postal rider who apologized twice for being the bearer of bad news before he'd even handed it over. Caleb stood in the yard with the envelope in his hands, his face unreadable. Eleanor came to stand beside him, her apron still dusted with flour from the bread she'd been making, and waited while he broke the seal. She watched his eyes move across the page once, twice, then a third time. His jaw tightened with each pass. "What does it say?" she asked quietly. "They're claiming our improvements are insufficient, that our marriage is fraudulent and entered into solely to meet homestead requirements, and that we have 30 days to vacate the property or they'll initiate foreclosure proceedings." His voice was flat, carefully controlled. "They're taking everything." Eleanor felt the world tilt. 30 days. 4 weeks to pack up their entire life and leave the land they'd poured themselves into. 4 weeks before they lost their home. No. The word came out fierce. They're not taking anything. We have Thornton. We have documentation. We have proof. They have lawyers and money and a contract that apparently has loopholes we didn't know about. Caleb crumpled the letter in his fist. Thornton warned us this might happen. Eastern Capital doesn't care about right or wrong. They care about profit. Eleanor grabbed his arm, forcing him to look at her. Then we fight. We go to Thornton right now, we show him this letter, and we fight back with everything we have. Eleanor, no, I won't accept this. I won't let them take our home because some Eastern businessmen decided they can make more money selling to someone else. Her voice shook with fury. This land is ours. We earned it with our hands and our backs and our marriage, and I'll be damned if I let them steal it without a fight. Something in Caleb's expression shifted, the resignation giving way to the same fierce determination that had made him stand against Dockery with a shotgun. All right, he said, we fight. They rode into town within the hour, the letter folded in Caleb's pocket like evidence of a crime. Thornton's office was exactly as they'd left it, cramped and smoke-filled, and the lawyer himself looked up from his paperwork with an expression that said he'd been expecting them. They sent the notice, he said. It wasn't a question. Caleb handed over the crumpled letter. Thornton smoothed it out and read it with the kind of clinical detachment that came from seeing this exact scenario play out dozens of times before. Standard intimidation tactics, he said finally. They're hoping you'll panic and vacate without a fight. Most people do. Saves them the trouble of an actual foreclosure hearing. We're not most people, Eleanor said. Thornton's eyes crinkled slightly. No, I'm gathering that. All right, here's what we're dealing with. They're claiming insufficient improvements, which is nonsense. Your documentation proves otherwise. They're claiming fraudulent marriage, which is harder to disprove because timing does look suspicious to an outside observer. And they're using contract language about suitable development, which is vague enough to be interpreted multiple ways. So what do we do? Caleb asked. We force them to prove their claims in court. I'll file a response challenging the foreclosure and will request a formal hearing where they have to present evidence. We have 30 days before they can act, which gives us time to strengthen our position. Thornton pulled out fresh paper and began writing. But I need to be honest with you both. This will be expensive. Court fees, my time, witness depositions, you're looking at several $100s minimum. Eleanor's heart sank. Several $100s was more than they had. More than they could get without selling off livestock or equipment they needed to survive. We'll find the money, Caleb said firmly, whatever it takes. Thornton nodded and kept writing. I'll also need you to be prepared for this to get ugly. Eastern Capital will dig into your marriage, your backgrounds, every aspect of your life. They'll try to paint you as opportunists gaming the system. They'll bring up the fact that you married mere weeks after Eleanor arrived. They'll probably call witnesses who'll testify about seeing Eleanor living in your home before the wedding. Let them, Eleanor said, her voice steady despite the fear curling in her stomach. We have nothing to hide. I lived in Caleb's home because I had nowhere else to go, and he offered shelter out of basic human decency. We married because we chose each other, not because we were trying to cheat anyone. And everything we've done since has been building a real life together. That's good. Keep that certainty. You'll need it in court. Thornton signed his name with a flourish. I'll file this tomorrow and let you know when the hearing is scheduled. In the meantime, continue documenting everything. And for the love of all that's holy, make sure there's no question about the legitimacy of your marriage. Live as husband and wife in every visible way. Give me ammunition to fight back with. They left the office with a mixture of hope and dread. The fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. And the cost might be more than they could afford. That evening, sitting on their porch bench as the sun set, Eleanor voiced the fear they'd both been avoiding. What if we can't raise the money for the lawyer fees? Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, We sell some cattle, enough to cover costs. But we need the herd for winter, for income next spring. We need the land more. He took her hand, lacing their fingers together. Cattle can be replaced. The herd can be rebuilt. But if we lose this place, we lose everything we've built, our home, our future. Any chance of... He stopped. Any chance of what? Of raising a family here someday. Of having children who grow up on land that belongs to them. His voice was soft. I've been thinking about that lately, about what our life could look like 5 years from now, 10 years. And every version of that future is here, on this land, with you. Eleanor's throat tightened. She'd been thinking the same thing, imagining children running through the meadow, teaching a daughter to garden, watching a son learn to ride from his father, building something that lasted beyond just the two of them. Then we sell what we need to sell, she said firmly, and we win, and we build that future. The next weeks were a blur of preparation. Caleb sold 15 head of cattle to neighboring ranchers, taking less than market value for the quick sale. Eleanor went through their supplies with brutal efficiency, determining what they could spare and what had to stay. They counted every dollar, every cent, and found they had just enough to cover Thornton's retainer with a small cushion for emergencies. The hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks out, late October, when the autumn chill would be settling into the territory and the land would be shifting toward winter dormancy. Thornton sent updates every few days detailing Eastern Capital's legal maneuvers and his responses. They were building a case that their marriage was fraudulent, citing the speed of the wedding and Eleanor's lack of local connections. Thornton countered with the neighbor testimonies and documentation of their shared domestic life. It was clinical and cold and reduced their marriage to evidence and exhibits. "I hate this," Eleanor said one evening, reading Thornton's latest letter. "I hate that strangers get to pick apart our relationship and decide if it's real enough. Our marriage isn't evidence, it's our life." Caleb pulled her against his side. "Then we show them it's our life. When we stand in that courtroom, when we testify, we make them see that this isn't fraud or convenience. It's us choosing each other every single day." 2 weeks before the hearing, Martha Henderson arrived with news that spread through the ranch community like wildfire. Eastern Capital had sent assessors to 3 other homesteads, all with the same result: notices of insufficient improvements and pending foreclosure. "They're trying to clear out all the small holders," Martha said bluntly, sitting at Eleanor's kitchen table with coffee and righteous anger. "Buy the land cheap through foreclosure, then resell it in big parcels to wealthy buyers from back east. It's land theft, legal but morally bankrupt." "What are the others doing?" Eleanor asked. "Most are planning to fight. The Millers hired Thornton too. The Crawfords are representing themselves. The Johnsons are just packing up. They don't have the money or energy for a legal battle." Martha's expression was grim. "We need to organize. Present a united front. Show the judge this isn't about one questionable homestead. It's about a company trying to steal from hardworking families." The idea took root quickly. Within a week, 5 homesteading families had joined forces, pooling resources and testimony. They met at the Henderson Ranch to coordinate their defense, and Eleanor found herself standing in a room full of frontier women who'd carved lives from raw land through sheer determination. "They think we're weak because we're scattered," Rebecca Mills said, her hands protective over her pregnant belly. "They think we'll just roll over and let them take everything. We need to show them they're wrong." "We need to show the judge that we're a community," Eleanor added, "that we support each other, know each other, and can testify to the legitimacy of each other's claims. We're not isolated homesteaders easy to dismiss. We're neighbors and friends building something that matters." The women looked at her with respect that made Eleanor's chest tight. 6 months ago, she'd been a stranger, abandoned and desperate. Now she was standing with women who saw her as one of them, a fighter, a builder, a woman worth standing beside. They spent the evening drafting a collective statement, each family contributing their story. When it was done, Martha read it aloud, and there wasn't a dry eye in the room. "We'll win this," she said fiercely, "because we have to. Because our homes and our futures are worth fighting for." The hearing took place on a cold October morning in the territorial courthouse, an imposing stone building that smelled of wood polish and old paper. Eleanor wore her best dress, one of Sarah's that she'd carefully altered and pressed until it looked almost new. Caleb wore his Sunday suit, his hair combed back and his face freshly shaved. They looked like what they were, honest people facing down something bigger than themselves. The courtroom filled with neighbors, supporters, and curious townspeople. On the other side sat 3 lawyers representing Eastern Capital, dressed in expensive suits and carrying leather cases full of documents. The judge was an older man with steel gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. Thornton presented their case first, methodically walking through the documentation. He showed the improvements to the land, the financial records proving Caleb's payments were current, the neighbor testimonies attesting to the Monroe marriage being legitimate and established. He called witnesses. Martha Henderson, who spoke bluntly about watching Eleanor and Caleb build a life together. Tom Mills, who testified that Caleb was one of the hardest-working ranchers in the territory. The postal writer who confirmed he'd delivered mail addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Monroe for months. Eleanor watched the judge's face, trying to read his reaction. He gave nothing away. Then Eastern Capital's lawyers took over, and the questions became sharp and invasive. Mrs. Monroe, you arrived in Montana Territory to marry William Dockery, correct? Eleanor kept her voice steady. That was my intention, yes. And when you found him absent, you immediately moved into Mr. Monroe's home? I accepted shelter that was offered because I had nowhere else to go. Mr. Monroe acted out of common decency. And you married him 6 weeks later. Rather convenient, wouldn't you say? I married him because I fell in love with him. Eleanor looked directly at the lawyer. Because he treated me with respect and kindness. Because we built something real together. The timing might look suspicious to you, but love doesn't follow a schedule that satisfies Eastern Capital's comfort. A murmur ran through the courtroom. The lawyer's expression tightened. You expect this court to believe that a woman with no money and no prospects just happened to fall in love with a man whose land claim would benefit from a hasty marriage? Caleb stood before Thornton could stop him. I expect this court to believe my wife when she says she married me for love, because unlike your company, we deal in truth instead of manipulation. The judge's gavel came down sharp. Mr. Monroe, sit down. You'll have your chance to testify. Caleb sat, but his hand found Eleanor's under the table and squeezed hard. When it was Caleb's turn to testify, he spoke with the same quiet intensity he brought to everything. I offered Eleanor shelter because it was the right thing to do. I married her because I couldn't imagine my life without her. And I've spent every day since proving to her that she made the right choice trusting me. He looked directly at the judge. Eastern Capital wants you to believe our marriage is fraud because the timing's convenient for their case, but they're asking you to ignore that I'm a better man with her beside me, that our land is more productive, our home is stronger, our future is brighter. They're asking you to reduce a marriage to paperwork when anyone who's actually married knows it's about partnership and commitment and choosing each other every single day. The courtroom was silent when he finished. The Eastern Capital lawyers presented their case, citing contract language and questioning the speed of the courtship and generally trying to paint the Monroes as opportunists. But Thornton countered every point, and by the time both sides rested, Eleanor felt cautiously hopeful. The judge took a recess to review the evidence. Eleanor and Caleb waited on a bench outside the courtroom, hands clasped, surrounded by their neighbors who'd come to show support. Whatever happens, we'll face it together, Caleb murmured. Together, Eleanor agreed. When they were called back in, the courtroom was packed. The judge looked out over the crowd, then down at the papers before him. I've reviewed the evidence presented by both parties, and I've considered the broader implications of this case, not just for the Monroes, but for the other homesteaders facing similar challenges from Eastern Capital Investment Group. He paused, and Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. The company claims insufficient improvements despite documentation proving otherwise. They claim fraudulent marriage despite testimony from multiple witnesses attesting to its legitimacy. They claim technical contract violations while ignoring the spirit and intent of homestead law. The judge's gaze swept the Eastern Capital lawyers. This court finds that the Monroe homestead has met all requirements under the Homestead Act. Their improvements are substantial and well documented. Their marriage, while perhaps unconventional in its timing, is legally valid and supported by credible testimony. He picked up his gavel. The foreclosure action is denied, the Monroe claim stands, and furthermore, I'm issuing a directive to the Land Office to scrutinize all future foreclosure attempts by Eastern Capital to ensure they're not using technicalities to circumvent legitimate homestead claims. The gavel came down. For a moment, Eleanor couldn't breathe. Then the courtroom erupted in cheers and applause. Caleb pulled her into his arms, and she buried her face against his chest and felt tears, good tears, relieved tears, soak into his jacket. We won, she whispered. We actually won. You were never going to let us lose. Caleb said, pulling back to cup her face in his hands. His eyes were bright. You fought too hard, believed too much.
I love you, Eleanor Monroe. Should have said it weeks ago, but I'm saying it now. I love you. Eleanor laughed through her tears. I love you too. So much it terrifies me. He kissed her right there in the courtroom, in front of the judge and the lawyers and half the territory, and Eleanor kissed him back without a shred of self-consciousness. Outside, their neighbors mobbed them with congratulations. Martha hugged Eleanor hard enough to crack ribs. Rebecca was crying and laughing at the same time. The men clapped Caleb on the back and shook his hand until Eleanor thought his arm might fall off. Thornton appeared, looking satisfied. Well fought, both of you. Your testimony was exactly what we needed. Honest, heartfelt, and impossible to dismiss as fraud. What about the others? Caleb asked. The other homesteaders? Similar rulings across the board. The judge essentially gutted Eastern Capital's strategy. They can't use vague contract language to force out legitimate claims anymore. Thornton allowed himself a small smile. You started something today, set a precedent that'll protect homesteaders across the territory. That night, back at their ranch under a sky brilliant with stars, Eleanor and Caleb sat on their porch bench and let the magnitude of what they'd accomplished settle over them. We could have lost everything, Eleanor said quietly, if the judge had ruled differently, if we hadn't fought back. But we didn't lose. We fought and we won, and this land is ours free and clear. Caleb pulled her closer. And now we get to build the future we talked about. No more threats. No more uncertainty. Just us and this land and whatever we choose to make of it. Eleanor leaned into him and felt peace settle into her bones. I want to plant an orchard next spring. Apple trees. Maybe some pears. Something that'll take years to mature but will last for generations. I like that. Something permanent. Caleb pressed a kiss to her temple. And I want to add on to the cabin. Build a proper bedroom. Maybe another room for... He stopped. For children? Eleanor finished softly. If we're blessed with them, yes. Eleanor turned to look at him, this man who'd become her husband and her partner and her home. I'd like that. A family. Roots that go deep. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars and listening to the night sounds of the prairie. The land stretched around them, vast and unforgiving, but theirs now in a way that couldn't be taken away. Winter came and went in a blur of snow and firelight and the deep satisfaction of weathering the cold together. Eleanor read aloud from books while Caleb carved wooden pieces for the new room he was planning. They made love under heavy quilts and woke to frost-painted windows and coffee that tasted better for being shared. When spring arrived, Caleb ordered apple saplings from a nursery in Oregon, and they spent a week digging holes and planting the tiny trees in careful rows south of the cabin. The trees looked impossibly small, fragile sticks in the vast prairie, but Eleanor watered them faithfully and imagined the orchard they'd become. 20 years from now, these will be full-grown, she said, standing back to admire their work. Our children will climb them, maybe our grandchildren. Caleb came to stand behind her, his arms coming around her waist. His hand rested on her stomach, which had just started to swell with the life growing inside. Sooner than you think, he murmured against her ear. Eleanor covered his hand with hers and felt tears prick her eyes. She was pregnant, had known for a month but had been waiting for the right moment to tell him. But there'd been no moment more perfect than this one, standing in the orchard they'd planted together. You knew? She asked. Suspected. You've been tired lately, and you get this look sometimes, like you're listening to something the rest of us can't hear. He turned her to face him. Are you happy about it? Terrified, thrilled, overwhelmed. Eleanor laughed shakily. But yes, happy. So happy I don't have words for it. Caleb kissed her softly. We're going to be parents. We're going to be parents, Eleanor agreed, wonder in her voice. They stood there among the young trees, two people who'd found each other through abandonment and necessity and had built something far more valuable than either had imagined possible. The years that followed were filled with the kind of hard work and simple joys that defined frontier life. Their daughter was born in late autumn, delivered with Martha Henderson's help and Caleb's terrified assistance. They named her Sarah, after the woman who'd first made this house a home, and Eleanor held her and wept with gratitude for the life she'd been given.
A son followed 2 years later, strong and healthy with Caleb's gray-green eyes. They named him James, after Caleb's father, and Eleanor learned what it meant to be so full of love it physically hurt. The orchard grew. The apple trees that had been fragile saplings became sturdy young trees, then mature ones heavy with fruit every autumn. Eleanor taught her children to harvest apples, to make preserves, to appreciate the miracle of something planted with hope, becoming something that sustained them. The cabin expanded. Caleb built the bedroom he'd promised, then another for the children. He added a covered porch where they could sit even in rain. Eleanor sewed curtains for every window and planted flowers that made the house look like something from a storybook. The ranch prospered. Word had spread about their legal victory, and Caleb became someone other homesteaders turned to for advice about protecting their claims. He and Eleanor welcomed neighbors into their home, shared meals and strategies, built the kind of community that made survival possible and life worth living. William Dockery was never seen again in the territory. Rumor had it he'd gone back east, tail between his legs, to marry some unfortunate woman who didn't know his true character. Eleanor rarely thought of him. He'd been a footnote in her journey, not the story itself. Eastern Capital Investment Group tried a few more foreclosures, but the precedent set by the Monroe case made it difficult. Eventually, they sold their holdings to local banks and pulled out of the territory, seeking easier profits elsewhere. Eleanor felt fierce satisfaction every time she thought about it. 10 years after that first desperate day when she'd stood at a locked gate with nowhere to go, Eleanor stood in the same spot. But everything was different. The gate was open now, welcoming. The house beyond it was full of life and laughter. The land was cultivated and cared for, marked by their labor and love. She was 40 now, her hands work-worn, and her face weathered by sun and wind. Her children were growing like weeds. Sarah was 8, James was 6, and another baby was on the way. Her body ached most mornings, and she couldn't remember the last time she'd slept past dawn. She'd never been happier. Caleb came up behind her, his own body showing the years but still strong, still steady. He wrapped his arms around her and rested his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. Eleanor leaned back against him. "About how I thought I was coming here for one thing and found something completely different. Something infinitely better." "Regrets?" "Not a single one." She turned in his arms to face him. The gray in his hair suited him. The lines around his eyes came from laughter as much as hard work. "I was supposed to marry a man who saw me as property. Instead, I married a man who sees me as a partner. I was supposed to be someone's obligation. Instead, I became someone's choice." Caleb smiled. The full, genuine smile he saved for moments when it was just the two of them. "Best choice I ever made." "Best choice we both made," Eleanor corrected. In the distance, they could hear their children playing near the creek, their laughter carrying on the wind. The apple orchard stood full and proud, heavy with fruit ready for harvest. Smoke curled from the chimney of a home that had been built with hope and maintained with love. Eleanor looked at it all, the land, the children, the man beside her, and felt the deep certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. She hadn't gotten what she'd hoped for when she boarded that train in Philadelphia all those years ago. She'd gotten so much more. A home earned through partnership rather than granted through marriage. A husband who valued her for who she was, not what she could provide. Children growing up on land that belonged to them, learning from parents who loved each other genuinely. A life that was hers. Completely, wholly, irreversibly hers. "Come on," Caleb said, taking her hand. "Let's go collect those children before they fall in the creek." Again. Eleanor laughed and let him lead her across the land they'd fought for, toward the family they'd built, into the future they'd earned together. And as she walked, the Montana sun warm on her shoulders and her husband's hand steady in hers, Eleanor Shaw Monroe knew with absolute certainty that she was home. Finally, permanently, perfectly home.